On the phone, we have a legend. He's such a big legend. He's got his own a show named after him, the Tim McCarver Show. He was a former St. Louis Cardinal, played for the Phillies, and he's a legendary broadcaster, Tim McCarver. How you doing today, Tim?
I'm doing great. I appreciate that intro. That was very, very nice. Very, very nice. Yeah, it's hard to believe it's been 55 years since I signed with the Cardinals back in 1959, and in fact, my first major league hit was an infield hit off Glenn Hobby at Wrigley Field in '59. At the woeful age of 17. Oh, to be 17 again.
Some of us can't remember that far back.
I can.
How did you get up so quickly, even if it was for a brief cup of coffee then?
Well, in '59, I mean, the September call-ups are often young players where organizations want to give young players a chance to come up for a cup of coffee and wean them over a period of years to be comfortable when they put on a major league uniform. The interesting thing, I was up parts of 1959, 60, and 61. I was up for a month in '59, and then I was called up to contribute in 1960, and I had 10 at-bats in 2 months. And then in 1961, a different circumstance, Hal Smith, the regular catcher, had a heart attack, and I was called up for a couple of months in the middle of the season, and then my only full year in the minor leagues was 1962. And the reason I bring those things up, my waivers were up. You had 3 waivers, and in 1963 I had a horrible spring training. It was to be my first full year, which interestingly was Stan Musial's last year, and the Cardinals had to keep me. And fortunately for me, when they put me in there and when they started me occasionally in April and May, I happened to do well and took over the #1 catching job. And the rest, as we are prone to say, is history.
So your first manager is what, Sally Hemus?
First manager was Sally Hemus, right. And in fact, in 1961, when I was called up, Sally Hemus was replaced at the Coliseum in Los Angeles by Johnny Keane. And Johnny became our manager through 1964, and of course managed the World Series champion Cardinals to a World Series championship in '64 over the Yankees. And then, surprising everybody, Johnny became the manager of the Yankees after that year. And Yogi was fired, and Red Shandies became our manager and was our manager for 12 years.
How stunned were you that Johnny Keane submitted his letter of resignation? Did you see that coming at all?
Well, we had heard rumors that year, and of course we were 11 and a half games behind the Phillies on August 23rd, and ended up winning the pennant on the last day of the season. We had no idea what was going on behind the scenes. From history, we find out, particularly from David Halberstam's book, October 1964, which was a great book. He found out that Leo DeRocher had actually signed a contract that year. And then when Johnny Keane moved to the Yankees, the Cardinals had a real PR problem, so they tore up DeRocher's contract, coaxed Red Shandies into managing the team, and as I said, Red became the manager for 12 years. So, a lot of things that happened behind the scenes. From a ball player standpoint, we had no idea what was going on. No.
Yeah. But Leo had a Cardinals background, too, so I don't know that...
Yeah, he had a Cardinals background, but not nearly as strong as Red Shandies. So from a public relations standpoint, even though DeRocher played in the 30s with the Gas House Gang and all that sort of stuff, I mean, Red Shandies was a Hall of Famer to be and one of the more popular figures next to Stan Musial in St. Louis Cardinal history. So...
Did Musial ever want a manager? He had no inkling to do that.
Say that again?
Did Musial ever want to be a manager? Because it seemed natural to make Musial.
No. Stan wanted no part of that job. No. He made that clear early. But interestingly, Stan, after Bing Devine was fired, Bob Howsam was hired, and then Bob Howsam moved to the Cincinnati Reds, and Stan became our general manager for 1 year, 1967. And as befitted Stan Musial, everything he touched turned to gold, the Midas touch. We won the World Championship against the Red Sox that year, and then Stan quit. He said, "This GM job's no big deal."
It's so easy. What's the challenge, right?
That was Stan. I mean, everything Stan touched turned to more than gold.
Now, growing up in Memphis, you were also a standout running back or a standout football player at Christian Brothers High School, and had an offer from Tennessee and Notre Dame to play. Does that sound right?
Yes, that's correct. But in those days there was no draft, so I couldn't be. The draft wasn't instituted until 1965, so. There was no way I could be drafted, so the bonus rule applied, and I was offered a big bonus. And to the son of a Memphis policeman, that was a lot of money, $75,000, and that's why I signed with the Cardinals and opted not to go to either Tennessee or Notre Dame. It would probably have been Tennessee, but it was interesting. I was always growing up a Catholic and going to a Catholic high school and grammar school. Notre Dame was obviously prominent in those days. Terry Brennan was the coach, and I remember going up there and sitting on the bench on October 12th, 1958, and that was one of the biggest thrills to this day, one of the biggest thrills of my life.
Now, you have another Cardinal broadcaster, Mike Shannon, who went to CBC in St. Louis and was a pretty good football player. Did you ever
Great football player.
Did you guys ever discuss who was a better football player?
No, because we played different positions. Mike was a quarterback and I was an end. In those days, guys went both ways, so, offensively and defensively. So, who knows? I mean, Mike, a year older than I, could have been throwing. Had I gone to CBC St. Louis or him to CBC in Memphis, we could have hooked up for a few pass catches. But we chose the right sport.
What was it like catching Bob Gibson? I mean, it just seemed like no one could hit that guy. He was so intimidating.
Bob Gibson was intimidated, is intimidating, and will be intimidating until he dies. He's a wonderful guy. I've told him all these years, I said, Bob, he's one of my closest friends in life, and I told him, Bob, you're just a big pussycat. You scare people away. He said, don't you tell anybody. I said, in other words, it has been all an act all these years, and he kind of laughed. But Bob was a ferocious competitor. I think none of that has died down over the years. I mean, everything that has been said about Bob Gibson, everything that I've said about Bob over the years is absolutely true. There's nothing apocryphal in talking about Bob. I mean, his athletic prowess is well known. 7 straight World Series wins, 8 out of 9 complete games. Unbelievable stuff that will never, particularly in this day and age with pitch counts and stuff like that, it'll never be duplicated, in my view. But Bob was just a classic competitor, remarkable athlete, great basketball player, played for the Globetrotters at one time. And all you have to do is look at Bob's postseason World Series pitching performances, and you'll see who the real Bob Gibson is. I mean, one of the great pitchers ever, and that's not underplaying it.
So as catcher, were you the one most responsible for his 1.12 ERA?
No, he was. No, that's hard. The one thing about Bob had great control, and a lot of people think that that because he threw hard, that was the reason for his success. Not really. In 1968, I mean, he got away with pitches that other pitchers didn't get away with. But in 1968, and I've said this many times, he went through a period where about 95% of the time, maybe even more, he could put the ball in the space of about 2 widths of the baseball on the outside part of the plate, primarily to right-handed batters. Right-handers had no chance that year. Left-handers had a better chance, but I mean, this guy was unbelievable as far as spotting the ball, and a lot of people don't know, and it's not talked about enough about Gibson's control. His control was phenomenal, particularly in 1968, to the point where baseball lowered the mound the next year. And when you can change the rules of the game and change the rules of the playing field, that means you've done pretty well. And that's what happened after 1968 with Bob.
One of the Cardinal stars of that era was third baseman Ken Boyer. And as a lifelong Cardinal fan, I haven't understood why Ron Santo gets into the Hall of Fame and Ken Boyer doesn't, because when I look at their statistics, they look pretty close to me.
Yeah. Ron may have had a few more home runs, but I couldn't agree with you more. I think Kenny Boyer has been overlooked, not even mentioned really in Hall of Fame conversations. And I mean, he was the captain. There are 2 players in my recollection that were referred to as captains long after their playing days were over. One was Pee Wee Reese of the Dodgers, and the other was Kenny Boyer. Kenny was nobody else but the captain. MVP in 1964, the great home run in Game 4, the grand slam off Al Downing, and he was a real leader. And had he been given the opportunity with a good team, he would have been a good major league manager. But unfortunately, bad health intervened, and Kenny died in 1982.
You weren't too shabby either in that 64 World Series with the home run.
Yep, not bad. You can look it up.
As they say. Now, do you remember the umpire for your first game?
I have no idea, no.
Okay, because it says, I read somewhere that it was Brent Musburger.
Oh, that was my first professional game. I thought you meant my first major league game. Absolutely. No, Brent Musburger Brent was one of the umpires in 1959 in Waterloo, Iowa. He was 19 years old. I was 17, and Brent was the umpire. He was trying it for a year, and in fact, I threw the first pitch out in Philadelphia a couple of years ago, and Steve Carlton was the catcher. Brent Musburger was the home plate umpire, and my grandson was the batter. And I threw the ball out. What a proud moment that was.
Was it a strike?
No.
Close enough.
I'm sure Carlton ribbed you about that.
No, he didn't. No, Musburger called it a strike anyway.
Speaking of Carlton, most of he was traded for Rick Wise. Did you see the greatness that was in him in St. Louis?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Steve had 2 pitches when he signed, a fastball and a curveball. In 1969, he came out with a slider, and he learned that slider from Bob Gibson on the trip to Japan in 1968. And you could see that slider developing, and as a matter of fact, he became the first pitcher to strike out 19 hitters against the Mets and lost the game 4-3 in 1969 on September 15th. And then 3 years later, Steve was traded for Rick Wise, and that slider became good enough to win him 251 games with the Philadelphia Phillies. And pretty staunch.
How did you end up becoming Carlton's personal catcher? Was that his choice, or did the manager realize you guys worked so well together?
Well, he had asked Paul Owens, the general manager of the Phillies, if I could catch. I mean, he had gone through 3 years of sub 500 appearances and performances and records, and the only thing I did when I caught him in 1976, as you know, fate works in strange ways. I mean, we had 3 catchers with the Phillies on opening day. First game of the year, Johnny Oates separated his shoulder when Dave Parker collided with him at home plate. Otherwise, I would have been the 3rd catcher, and most teams don't even carry 3 catchers now. So I'd have been the 3rd catcher and occasional pinch hitter. But because Oates was hurt, I became the 2nd catcher, and then ended up catching Carlton, and his record speaks for itself. So does mine. Let's move on, guys.
Who was the toughest pitcher that you faced?
Gibson was the toughest pitcher that I caught. Gibson. Carlton was a very close second. The toughest pitcher that I faced, Sandy Koufax, and a guy named Joe Gibbon of the Pittsburgh Pirates. And there were a few other left-handers in there also.
At what point did you know that you wanted to go into broadcasting?
Into broadcasting?
Yes, sir.
I had a whiff of that in 1976. I had a good year catching Steve. Steve won 20 games on the last day of the season. Not all 20, of course. His 20th on the last day of the season against the Mets. And we lost as Cincinnati, the Big Red Machine, took 3 in a row from us. But after that season, having a good year, I wanted to continue to play. The Steve Carlton McCarver combo tandem was deemed to be favorable, and the Phillies were willing to give me what I wanted from a contractual standpoint. And in those days, that was the first year of free agency, and contracts were, I never had an agent as a player, but anyway, all of it worked out. And the Toronto Blue Jays contacted me and wanted me to become an announcer, offered me a 4-year contract. I knew I had some friends in Toronto. I had more friends in Montreal, and they worked the Toronto deal. So the Phillies got wind of that, and they said that they would offer me a 2-year deal when my playing career was over. To broadcast for the Phillies. So that was all I needed, and the impetus that I needed. I ended up playing another 3 years, but I became an announcer in 1980, the year after I retired.
Well, you played a little in 1982, though, because you played in 4 decades.
No, I played in 1980. I came back for the month of September for 1980, but that was just a courtesy call. As a matter of fact, I had a show on. I had a post-game show on the air that year that I did in uniform. Now that may never have been done in the history of the game for a team. I actually interviewed the other side if the other team won. And that was a year that the Phillies not only won the pennant, but they won their first World Series. But I was awfully proud. Bill Giles asked me if I wanted to do it. I thought it was brilliant, and I told him absolutely. And Dallas Green, the manager, had no problem with it. So I had a post-game show in uniform. I'd go right from the bench to the television camera and interview either a Phillies player or whomever they were playing that night.
How do you get the competitive juices to turn off that quickly?
Competitive from what standpoint? From a
all of a sudden you're trying to beat the other team, and now
Well, I didn't play that much. That's during the game I became more interested in my post-game guests than the score of the Phillies game. So it was an odd situation. But it's not, I was not a regular catcher by any means. I only had, I think, 5 or 6 at bats in September. So I was well rested and well prepared to do a post-game show. So
the one moment of your career I never understood was the Grand Slam single, how you beat Gary Maddox around the bases.
No, I didn't beat him. I passed him. There's a big difference. I couldn't beat him. He could spot me first base, and I wouldn't have beaten Gary. But Gary came back to tag up, and that's when I hit the base. The ball was over Dave Parker's head, of course, in July 4th, 1976. And Ed Vargo, the second base umpire, I looked up and he was looking right at me. I was nailed. And I said, I didn't pass him. He lapped me, and he could have. But anyway, I was called out and given credit for a Grand Slam single.
Well, another single you had was in the 1966 All-Star Game, which was day in St. Louis. He let off the game-winning rally.
Yeah, he ended up scoring the winning run. Yeah, that was a big moment, I'll tell you. All of these things, guys, were big moments. I mean, you can't creep past these events. I mean, you got to speed past them, because that's kind of the way it feels over the last 55 years. I mean, it's been a blur. And the interesting people that I've met going into the broadcast booth in 1980, working for the Phillies, then the Mets, and then the Giants for a short period of time. I worked 3 years for the Yankees, and I've worked for all 4 networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox, and I'm presently working for the St. Louis Cardinals and doing a few games. And I enjoy the game. The game's been my life as much as anybody who's ever signed a contract as a player or a broadcaster. I mean, the game has been my life. And I have there been down periods? Well, of course there have. But for the most part, I'm very proud, and I put my body of work up against anybody.
Who was your favorite partner in the booth?
My favorite partner?
Yes.
Oh, gosh, I've had so many. Al Michaels was sensational. Dick Enberg taught me a lot. So did Al. The great Jack Buck was St. Louis. Sean McDonough, who was also doing Boston games at the time. Joe Buck and I had our longest run, 18 years together, and Joe is a real close friend. It would be very difficult for anybody to top Joe. And I'm presently working with a gentleman in the Cardinal booth named Dan McLaughlin, who works as hard as anybody as I've ever seen. And we became fast friends immediately. And that's what happens. I mean, if you're a good guy, if you work hard, people respect that. I respect it. They respect me. And that's what leads to harmony in the booth.
What is it with these Cardinal broadcasters? They're all becoming Hall of Famers. I mean, back in the 60s, you had Buck, Kerry Garagiola. Again, you have Shannon. You've had yourself, Bill White. I mean,
yeah, there are a bunch of guys who have worn the birds on the bat, and I don't know. Maybe it's in the water. I don't know. But it's worked over the years, and it's amazing the number of broadcasters that have been spawned with the Cardinal organization.
I think one partner you might have left out was the legendary Ralph Kiner with the Mets.
No, I didn't leave him out. I just I didn't leave him out intentionally, and I also didn't leave out Bobby Mercer intentionally. I've worked 3 years with Bobby in the Yankee booth, and Ralph Kiner was just a jewel. I mean, I'm still very close with his family. Went to his services earlier this year, and he was something. He was. I remember a writer in New York who called him precious, and boy was he ever precious, and precious to the game too.
We've been doing our show for 4 years now, interviewing the Hall of Famers, talking about their careers. And you gave me the idea because I remember turning on the TV one Sunday morning and seeing you talking to Willie Mays. How did you go about doing the Tim McCarver show?
Well, we've been on the air for 13 years, and we've been in reruns over the last year, as a matter of fact, for various reasons, and we're supposed to start taping again on the 9th of September. But I was asked 13 years ago in New York if I'd be interested in it, and we tried it out. It worked, and I've really enjoyed that over the years. It's been a source of a great deal of comfort to me.
When you were traded to Philadelphia, part of that Kurt Flood, who refused to go.
Guys, I got time for one more.
No problem.
The Kurt Flood trade. I had no idea that Kurt was going to take that route when we were traded back in 1969 for Dick Allen, Cookie Rojas, Jerry Johnson, and the Cardinals sent 4 players, including Kurt and me, to Philadelphia. And I had no idea how it was going to work. And then Kurt, all of a sudden, as a matter of fact, had Kurt not had that deal gone through, the player to be named later was supposed to be Mike Shannon, and Mike Shannon came down with nephritis. So instead of Mike Shannon, Willie Montañez became the player in place of Kurt Flood. A lot of people don't know that or don't remember that, but it was a big surprise to everybody in baseball, and I think. The fact that Kurt would give up $110,000 salary in those days, which was a ton of money, and stick to his principles, was quite something. And here, 5 or 6 years later, free agency was spawned, and I think Kurt Flood deserves a lot of credit for taking that first step.